Hey, welcome back to Bountifully Blessed. My name is Becky. Thank you so much for joining me today. As you can see, we're in a little bit of a different setting today. We are not out in the garden today, but we are actually in my kitchen today. And I wanted to share how I like to make my bone broth. Since I started making this a few years ago, I've had some fun kind of tweaking my recipe, and my husband loves it so much, he uses it for everything. If it can involve some kind of beef broth, it will go in it. And I tend to run out of it a lot faster than I do my chicken broth. So I wanted to have you guys come along and I can show my process of how I like to do my bone broth. So without further ado, let's get started. So what I actually like to do is I have my crock pots here. I have two of them and I also have an Instapot. So I've done it where I've done my crock pots and my Instapot. However, my Instapot, I noticed, because I like to let my bone broth do its thing for like a good 2 to 3 days, so I can just get all of that yummy goodness in it. I noticed with my Instapot, it, for some reason, absorbed a lot more of the moisture and it was leaking. I don't know why that happened. I don't know if it's maybe my Instapot, if there's something wrong with it, or maybe it's just the way Instapots are designed to work. They are designed to like hold in that moisture in a completely different way than a crock pot does. So I don't know if that was a me issue or if that was an it issue. But regardless, I usually like to do my crock pots because I feel totally safe just letting them sit and doing their thing. And then we get to smell all of that yumminess for multiple days, which usually ends up me needing to make some kind of roast by the end of it because it tastes, or it smells so good. The roast does taste really good, but anywho, so my process, I usually like to make quite a few bigger batches all at once. That way I can just do a set it and forget it. So get everything ready to go, get tons of stuff done with it, let it sit, and then I can get it all prepped, ready to go, and packaged and froze. So I'm going to take you along my journey of how I like to do my bone broth. So what I like to do, because it's just me and my husband, I usually don't have a whole lot of scraps from large meals that we do. So I actually just, as I get things like garlic and onions and carrots and celery and parsnips, I actually like to just keep them in a freezer bag, and anytime I get scraps, I stick them in there so that way I can get this done. And then I have my bones here. These ones I actually picked up from Winco. They are beef soup bones. I have discovered that this is a very cost-effective way since I'm not able to get things like half a cow. Eventually, I'd like to be able to do that, but my husband and I are still in an apartment. We are in a small space, so being able to buy the bones is very cost-effective. This gives me a little over 2 pounds. It's 2.11 pounds for $4.60. And the nice thing is that a lot of people don't realize you can actually reuse the bones until they're soft. So you can get a lot of use out of these. So you already think that $4.60 is a great price for how many bones we have in here. But it gets even better when you realize how many times you can reuse this. It's pretty incredible, to be quite honest. And then you just, instead of reusing all of the goodies, like all of your scraps, make sure that you have new scraps. Your shavings from your carrots and your celery and whatever you like to use. And then I also have this, let's see, I think it's a T-bone that we got. And I wanted to make sure I saved it. We were out at a restaurant, and my husband and I love to get steak. And he'd gotten a T-bone. And I was like, oh my goodness, I was like, save that bone for some broth. So I've got even this, and this didn't cost me anything extra other than what it cost at the store or the restaurant. Sorry, my apologies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate in both of these crock pots that I have here. I'll lower you here so you can kind of see what I'm doing. So I can separate the amount of bones into each thing. So I've got this lovely, and it's got the meat on there, which is totally fine. That's not going to hurt anything. If anything, that's just going to add to some of the yummy flavor. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my soup bones here. And we can really see how many I got in here. So I've got 4 really nice big pieces of bone in here. So I'm going to separate. So we'll just separate these based on size. So since I've got the T-bone in here, I'm going to put, since this is a smaller amount of bone, I'm going to put a little bit more in here. And I'll put one small one and really one big one in here so I can kind of evenly distribute them. And then it's really easy from there. You literally just take whatever your remaining scraps are, so to speak, and just kind of, I like to evenly distribute them. So I've got some onion here. I've got carrots, celery, parsnips, all of the good stuff. I just try and make sure that everything is kind of evenly distributed as best as possible into each of these. It's looking pretty good. This one's a little bit bigger of a crock pot. This one's an 8-quart and this one's only a 6-quart, I believe. So we've got that. And you can leave the skins on them. That's not going to hurt anything because at the end of everything, you're going to be draining it anyways. So it's literally just plopping it all in there for flavor. And then I'm going to grab some garlic. And again, I don't care about this because it's going to be coming out anyways. So I'm going to get some garlic cloves here. So I'm going to smash these against the thing there and open these up. All right. Oopsies. All right, I've got one in there. Little tiny baby one. So I think I'll do 2 cloves in each. Looks like that's about even. All right, looks like I had a total of 6 cloves, but that's okay. I accidentally made one fly across the room, and I don't know where it went, so that'll be sufficient. And yeah, you can leave all of this in there. That's not going to hurt it. And then I like to season mine with some red cooking wine. I don't use real wine in anything. And I'm just going to add a nice splash of that because this is going to cook out anything anyways. And then I like to add rosemary. Beautiful. And then you literally just fill it all the way up with water and start it. So I've got this one completely full. It looks a little nuts, but I promise it'll be worth it. And now I'm going to set the top on here and I'm going to plug this bad boy in. And you want your broth to at least, your bone broth, you want it to at least cook for at least 12 hours. Otherwise, I really like to do mine. I will not do mine less than a good 24 hours. I love the flavor that comes from it. But like I said, I'm going to let these do their thing for about 48 to 72 hours. I tend to usually lean towards the 72-hour mark because everything just really, really soaks in. You get all of that amazing flavor, and we'll just let these things do their thing. They're going to cook, and We're going to be smelling all of the yummies, and I'll probably have to make a roast at the end of the week for me and my husband. So I'm going to let these do their thing. And then as you notice the water slowly kind of evaporating over time, just continue to fill it up. And that's all that needs to happen until you're ready to take it out. So I'll be back with you when we are finished and ready to pour this up and freeze it. Hey friends, we're back. It's day 3 of when we started our beef stock, and I'm extremely excited to show you how I like to get mine all cooled off and prepped to go into the freezer so that we can use it when we need it. So I've got my 2 crock pots here that we started, and look how beautiful and dark that is now. Oh, so pretty. And it smells heavenly. All right, so now we've got to go through the fun process of getting this all prepped to go into the freezer. So what we're going to do here is first, because we've got all of the scraps that are in here, we have the, let's see, celery, carrots, parsnips, all that good stuff. Parsnips, garlic, onion, anything that I may have not mentioned. So what we're going to do is I've got my strainer here. This is pretty small. If you have a big one, that's super, super handy. I've always had this one because I've used it for tea and everything throughout the years. So what we're going to do is we are going to remove everything that's in here. So I'm going to take all the good stuff here, and we're just going to transfer all those things into our bowl here, because that's just where all the flavor has come from. Obviously, we don't want that just chilling in here. That's just gross. So remember, there's bones at the bottom of this. So if those get scooped out, I'm going to save those. Well, my bigger ones anyways. I don't know if I'll save the T-bone that we had from that steak. I'll have to see if it's soft or not. So save the bones, because I can get about anywhere from 3 to 5 uses from them. So there's one really big bone that we got. So we'll save that. And usually I just go through and I'll get those, let them cool off, and then I'll put them, well, I don't need to let them cool off if I'm going to be starting a whole new batch of broth. So usually what I'll do is I'll just do as many crock pots full as I can with what I have. And then if I have enough like extra scraps that I've saved, then I'll just keep doing this for multiple days until I've got a really, really large amount of stock made. So usually when you make stock versus a broth, broth is what you usually do. You flavor it, and it doesn't have the bones. The bones is what makes it a stock. Versus a broth has all the flavor, and you usually add meat to it. However, my husband, he likes to kind of have a mix of both. So I did add some meat into this about halfway through. I would have started it with it, but he likes to taste it as it's in process. And he tasted it and was like, that doesn't taste like what it's supposed to. And I'm like, well, it's a stock. It's not a broth. And he's like, well, I want it to be more like a broth. I apologize. My babies are in the background barking. So now that I've got all the big pieces out, so now that's what this looks like here. So I'm going to do the same thing with the other one. Okay, so now that we've gotten all of our scraps and bones out of our stock, I'll separate all the bones and I'll set them aside. Let me get a container for those. Let's see here. I think this will work. And I'm just going to make sure that I separate those so that way they don't get tossed. All the other scraps are going to go in the garbage. I don't need those anymore. Those have done their job, which was to flavor everything beautifully. All right. Surprisingly, these are not nearly as hot as I thought they would be. Okay. I knew there was another piece in there. Ooh. Now that one's still hot because it's buried by all of the liquid. Ooh, toasty. Okay. So before I get rid of that, that has a lot of the juices and everything still in it. So we don't want to toss that. So now I've got my bones. I'm just going to set those aside for later use. And now is the straining part of making the broth. So I have my strainer here. I've got a separate bowl. I've got my measuring cup, which is just to scoop everything up. And I'm going to grab one of my crock pots here. Grab a towel so I can grab both of them. All right. So as you can see, there's a layer of fat that is on top here. So I'm going to do my best to try and get rid of most of that before we do this process. There's lots of different ways that you can do that. I do have one of the measuring things, like the measuring cups that you use around Christmas time for like gravy. And for some reason, I am not 100% sure where I put it. That's unusual. Anyways, I'm going to do my best to just kind of scrape this layer off. So now what I'm going to do is, so that we don't have any remainder of seasonings or any extra scraps that maybe I missed, I'm just going to use this and I'm going to pour it into a separate container, like this bowl, and pour it through the strainer. So that way it can pick up any of the remains of anything that I may have missed. And most of the time, it's usually just seasonings that make their way through this process. Almost always. Like I've got leftover rosemary that's kind of appearing slowly. Most of it has probably settled to the bottom at this point. But as you can see, I do have a decent amount of a couple miscellaneous things. And as I get farther to the bottom, obviously, those will start to filter out even more. There we go. We're almost down to the bottom of that here. I think this has cooled down enough that I can feel confident to kind of pour it. There we go. And now all we have in the bottom of that is just some remnants of meat or any kind of leftovers that I didn't pick up in this. So all that was left in it, and we want that out. So I'm just going to toss that, rinse this off. Beautiful. All right, and we're going to complete the same process with the other one. Okay, so now that we've completed the process for both of these, before we finish making sure that as much of the fat is taken out, we're going to make sure that we get all of the yumminess that these guys soaked up. We don't want to waste this. So what I do is, I don't have a lot of counter space, so I'm making do with what I have. So I grab my strainer, and we're going to kind of do the same thing that we did with the broth, except for, oh, I forgot we have this big bone here. Except for we're going to kind of be straining the scraps. So now that that's been done, I'm going to give this a quick rinse. I try and clean up as I go as best as possible, especially with big things. Not always possible, but when it is, I highly recommend it. All right. So now here's the last step. I did end up finding my wonderful little gadget here. This is going to help me strain out the fat. Give that a good little rinse. Looked like I had some kind of weird residue in it. Okay. So I'm going to utilize this. And the fat is what comes into this here. Nope, I'm sorry. The good stuff is what comes through here. The fat layer is going to go to the top. So when you pour it, you're pouring all the good stuff until you get to the fat level, if that makes sense. So usually the top little layer there is a little fatty because I could see the little bubbles. I'm going to pour this. And then I'm going to stop right about, let's see, so you can kind of see. I don't know if you can see that. There is that fat layer that's right above it. That is what we're trying to avoid having go into the broth. So I'm going to pour this just a little bit longer. Put the fat layer that fell into there. See, now I'm having a hard time not just getting a bunch of fat. So I'm going to pour that. And now that's beautifully strained. There's not a bunch of those fat bubbles that you can see on the top. Now, obviously, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be 100% flawless, but we're trying to avoid it from looking like this and looking like this. Okay, friends, we're in the final stretch. Excuse me. I've got all of the fat that's been separated here. As you can see, it is just one layer of fat. And here we have all of our beautiful broth. Now, obviously, it's not going to be exactly perfect. There's little tiny bits of grease, but that's okay. I've not had any issues with that. I'm sure there's probably a foolproof way of doing that. I do have a tip or trick if something like this bothers you. You can actually grab some paper towels. And paper towels tend to help that kind of stick a little bit, especially if it's a thick layer. So you can kind of just go over it. The only problem that I have with doing this is, of course, you lose broth in it as well. If there's a really big piece or a lot of it, then I would recommend doing this. But otherwise, it's not really anything to be concerned about. So, unless it bothers you. But I want to get as much out of it as I can. So, you can do whatever you want with the fat. I'm just going to set it aside. And we're in the final stretch here. So I've got my big thing of broth. I've got my measuring cup here. And I've got, yes, I have cupcake trays here, or muffin tins, whatever you want to call them. I have 2 of them here. And what I like to use, now you can just use the trays. You don't need liners. However, I have noticed it become less of an annoyance if I do it with the cupcake liners. You can make sure you spray the inside of this with some olive oil spray or canola spray, whatever you like to use to line things to help them not stick, and you can do that. However, I've discovered this is a little bit better for me, but you do whatever you want. Make sure that if you do use liners, the cupcake liners, you can find these at Walmart for very cheap. Make sure that they have the aluminum on the outside. So they'll always have the paper on the inside. That's okay. But if they're just paper, they're going to be a giant mess to take off later. So make sure that they have the aluminum lining. And then I'm just going to line my tray. Now, each of these cupcakes of broth or stock are 1/4 of a cup. So 4 of them makes 1 whole cup of broth, okay? So that way you have your measuring guide already all set. One thing that I really love about this, I've been doing this for a long time now, and I have not gotten into canning yet. And so that's something that's on my agenda, but it's not something that I've been able to do just yet. So this is how I've been able to utilize my freezer and make it convenient to keep track of and utilize it as quickly as I can and as best as I can. And it's easy access for my husband still. So I just like to make sure that each one of these don't have too many little dinks in them. Some of them sometimes do, but it's not the end of the world. And what I like to do is fill these up. Oops. So I just have this as kind of a help. And I'm going to fill each one of my cupcakes here with this lovely, lovely beef stock. My husband and I have decided to call it stoth, or what was the other word I was using the other day? It's a broth. There we go. Because a stock only contains bones, does not contain meat. A broth contains meat. But my husband, because he loves the flavor of broth and likes to be able to just drink this straight from the source if he's not feeling good or wants it in soup and he just really wants a good tasting broth, then he likes it to taste a very specific way if possible. So we've decided that this is a broth. It's a broth and a stock because it involved bones and it also involved meat. Okay. After we're done filling these are going to go in the freezer until they harden. I haven't actually kept 100% track of how long it takes. I brought these straight out from the crock pot, so they were still warm. Make sure that each one of these is filled here. Beautiful. And then this is going to get popped into the freezer behind me. And we're going to let that get hardened. And then I will be back to show you the very last process, very last step, which is getting them in their containers to go into the freezer for use. Okay, friends, we're back. And our last step for our wonderful beef stock / broth, or as I've been calling it, brock. We're just going to finish off the last little tidbit of how I get it all prepped for the freezer. So I've got my broth here that we put in the freezer to get all nice and hard. And remember, each cupcake is 1/4 of a cup. So 4 of these is 1 cup. Okay. So what I like to do is I'm just going to actually flip this over. I'll angle you so you can see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to flip this over. I'm gonna actually bring over my cutting board here because sometimes the tops of them can be a little sticky. And I'm just gonna do a little flip. And for the most part, most of them will come out. But if they don't, what I actually do is I flip it upside down and I apply pressure to the back of the cupcake liner. Move those all out of the way. So I've got that one. So now I know where that one's at. So I'm going to actually flip this just like this, and I'm going to do this. And voila. So nice little pop there. We're going to do that with both of these. Sometimes you can kind of crack it like you would an ice cube tray. Sometimes you can't. So most of the time I'm flipping them upside down and I'm applying some pressure. So they don't fall out. I'm just going to go around, give them a good push. Most of the time you can feel it kind of pop out. And if you don't, then of course you can double check. Looks like I've just got one that was being a little bit finicky. And get that last one. Pop that bad boy. I felt that one happen too. And voila! It's that easy. And I can just rinse those out for use. Okay, so I like to separate my beef stock into cup, half cups, and sometimes 4 cups if I know like I have a big thing that I'm going to be utilizing it for. But I've noticed my husband, if it ends up being something that he super duper loves, it ends up staying in a bag, and then that ends up getting opened, and then he uses, you know, half a cup to a cup, maybe 2 cups, and then the rest of it is just sitting in an unsealed bag, and then it's going to get frost. And so that's what I try to avoid. So right here, as you can see, I've got 6 cups. I have way more than that, but this is what I had in the 2 cupcake liners that I have. I'm going to set those aside here. And then I've done this in just a standard freezer bag, but I got this little cheap, it's called Fresco. It's a little cheap food saver. I got this on Amazon. If you're interested in it, I can link it below. This thing was cheap, which is why I got it. And I've been using this for a lot longer than I honestly would have given it. It takes up very little space. It's got the nice little area there for any liquids that may drain. And it's very basic. It's got a seal, a dry, and a moist function. And then on the very back here, if you have any kinds of like bottles that you need to seal, I know it's popular for wine and dressings, I'm guessing. So it's got that function on it too. I have not needed to use that because I don't drink, but it's a nice function to have if you need it. So I've got that, and then I've just got my food saver bags here. Again, these are the same brand. They're fairly cheap. I've had the same batch for a long time, and I've got my really, really big ones. So these ones are perfect if I'm going to do 4 cups. And then I've actually ran out of my small ones, so I actually had to make some small ones from these big ones. And I'm happy to show you how I do that if that's something that interests you. Otherwise, I'm just going to trim these, and I am going to utilize one for 4 cups, and then I'm going to put the other 2 separately. So I can label them 2 on top of each other. Layers of 3. And then I can seal them up, and I can specify what it is on the bag. And it's literally that easy. So there's 4 cups worth of broth right there. So if you know you have a big thing that you need broth for, it's so nice. And keep it in the freezer, pop it out. And once you go to use them, what you'll do is you'll actually just take one of the cupcakes And you can just let it defrost, that's fine. But what I usually do, because this is going to actually be stuck to it, the reason why it's important to make sure that you have the aluminum is you run it under some water and that'll peel right off, no problem. And it'll just pop right off, no problem. And then you'll basically have a cute little stock or broth cupcake. And then you can toss that into your soups. You can toss that in for anything that you need to do. So I'm going to get this vacuum sealed really quick and labeled. And this is good to go into the freezer. I have exactly 4 cups of my broth or my stock here. I always keep a handy dandy permanent marker here. And since this is beef, I'm going to mark that. And today is the 2nd. So I'm going to put the date on that, although this stuff doesn't last very long in our house. And that's it. It's literally that simple. So I hope that you found this whole being very informational, educational. If you have any questions, let me know. It can be a little bit of a process, but oh my goodness, it's worth it. It saves so much money. And on top of that, it tastes so good. And you can control what's in your stock, which is something that's really important to me. I want to be able to control as much of the ingredients as I possibly can. So I've got my 4 cups here. That's going to go in my freezer. And then I've got my other couple of 1 cups. I've got 2 of those. And I'm just going to do the exact same thing with them, just in a smaller vacuum sealed bag. So I trust that you'll have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining me. Until next time.